My child. The invitation appeared without a sender. No one knew who delivered it. No one knew why your name was written inside. But when your soulmate saw it, everything changed. Listen carefully, because this message carries a truth that was hidden for far longer than you realize. There are moments in life that arrive with noise and celebration, and then there are moments that arrive in complete silence yet carry enough power to change an entire destiny. This was one of those moments. It began on an ordinary day, a day that seemed no different from all the others before it. The sun rose as usual. People followed their routines. Conversations filled rooms and streets. Nothing seemed unusual until a single envelope appeared where no envelope should have been. It rested quietly, almost as if it had always been there, waiting for the exact moment someone would notice it. At first, nobody paid attention. It looked like an ordinary wedding invitation. Elegant. Beautiful. Mysterious. Yet something about it felt different. Something about it seemed impossible to explain. The paper looked untouched by time. The writing shimmered slightly when the light touched it. And despite being passed from hand to hand, nobody could figure out who had delivered it. Curiosity grew. Questions spread. Whispers began. And then someone finally opened it. The room fell silent. Because written inside that invitation were two names. One was your soulmate's. The other was yours. Don't skip. The silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. Some stared at the invitation again, convinced they had read it incorrectly. Others leaned closer, searching for a mistake. Surely this had to be a misunderstanding. Surely someone had mixed up the names. Yet the more they looked, the clearer it became. There was no error. No correction. No crossed-out words. The invitation looked as though it had been created specifically for the two of you. And yet there was one problem. Neither of you had announced any wedding. Neither of you had planned one. Neither of you had even spoken openly about such a future. So how could an invitation already exist? The mystery deepened. People began offering explanations. Some claimed it was a prank. Others insisted it was a coincidence. A few laughed nervously and tried to dismiss the entire thing. But deep down, everyone felt the same unsettling sensation. This invitation felt real. Far too real. Meanwhile, your soulmate stood frozen. The moment they saw your name beside theirs, something shifted inside them. A feeling they had tried to ignore suddenly became impossible to escape. Memories surfaced. Emotions returned. Questions they had buried long ago rose back to the surface. Because the truth was that your soulmate had imagined this moment before. Not once. Not twice. But countless times. They had never told anyone. They had never admitted it aloud. Yet in quiet moments, when nobody was watching, they had wondered what it would feel like to see your names together forever. And now it was happening. Not in a dream. Not in a fantasy. But right in front of them. Don't skip. As the invitation continued circulating among friends and family, reactions became stronger. Some smiled. Some appeared shocked. Others exchanged knowing glances as though a secret they had suspected for years had finally revealed itself. Yet nobody's reaction compared to your soulmate's. Because while everyone else was staring at paper and ink, your soulmate was staring at possibility. They remembered every moment that connected them to you. Every unexpected encounter. Every strange coincidence. Every conversation that lingered longer than expected. Every feeling they could never fully explain. Suddenly those memories formed a pattern. A pattern they could no longer ignore. What if this invitation wasn't random? What if it wasn't an accident? What if it was revealing something that destiny had already written? That question echoed through their mind. Again. And again. And again. The more they thought about it, the harder it became to dismiss. Because the connection between you had always felt different. There had always been something unusual about it. Something powerful. Something impossible to replace. Even when distance appeared. Even when confusion entered the story. Even when circumstances tried to pull your paths apart. The connection never completely disappeared. Instead, it waited. Quietly. Patiently. Like a story refusing to end. Don't skip. Later that evening, your soulmate found themselves alone with the invitation. The room around them felt unusually still. Outside noises faded into the background. Time itself seemed slower. They looked at the invitation once more. Then once again. Then again. As though hoping new answers would appear. Instead, something else appeared. A realization. Not about the invitation. Not about the wedding. But about you. For the first time, they allowed themselves to consider a possibility they had resisted for a very long time. What if you were never just another person in their life? What if you were the person their heart had been recognizing all along? The thought frightened them. Not because it felt wrong, but because it felt right. And sometimes the truth is more frightening than uncertainty. Because truth demands action. Truth demands honesty. Truth demands courage. Your soulmate understood that. And deep inside, they knew that seeing your name beside theirs had awakened something they could not put back to sleep. The invitation had become more than paper. It had become a mirror. A mirror reflecting feelings they could no longer deny. The more they stared at it, the more they understood. This was not about a wedding. This was about destiny revealing itself before either of you were fully prepared. Don't skip. Meanwhile, something equally unusual was happening elsewhere. People who knew both of you began sharing stories. Stories that had seemed meaningless before suddenly carried new significance. They remembered moments when your paths crossed unexpectedly. They remembered conversations that hinted at deeper feelings. They remembered reactions, glances, and emotions that now appeared impossible to ignore. One person recalled the way your soulmate's expression changed whenever your name was mentioned. Another remembered a conversation where your soulmate described their ideal future without realizing they were describing you. Another remembered a moment of silence that spoke louder than words ever could. Piece by piece, the puzzle grew clearer. And every new piece pointed toward the same conclusion. Your story was never ordinary. Your connection was never random. And perhaps this invitation had arrived because the universe was tired of waiting for both of you to recognize what had always been there. The realization struck your soulmate harder than they expected. Because once they accepted it, everything changed. The excuses disappeared. The doubts weakened. The fears lost power. Only one question remained. If destiny had already written your names together, would they have the courage to follow where it led? And as they stared at that mysterious invitation beneath the fading evening light, a feeling settled over them unlike anything they had experienced before. It wasn't certainty. Not yet. It wasn't confidence. Not completely. It was something deeper. Something stronger. A quiet knowing. A feeling that this story was only beginning. And that the greatest revelation had not yet arrived. Don't skip. Because what happened next was something nobody could have predicted, and yet somehow it felt as though it had been waiting in the shadows all along. The mysterious invitation remained on the table, but its presence seemed to grow larger with every passing hour. People continued talking about it. Questions spread farther. Speculation turned into obsession. Yet the most important battle was not happening in public. It was happening inside your soulmate's heart. That night, sleep refused to come easily. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw the invitation. Every time they tried to think about something else, your name returned. Again. And again. And again. They remembered moments they had nearly forgotten. Tiny details that once seemed insignificant suddenly carried enormous meaning. A conversation that lasted longer than expected. A glance neither of you acknowledged. A strange sense of familiarity from the very beginning. The feeling that meeting you had not felt like meeting someone new but remembering someone important. The deeper they traveled into those memories, the harder it became to escape the truth. Because every road led back to you. And somewhere in the middle of the night, they finally whispered a question they had never dared ask before. What if it was always meant to be them? The room offered no answer. Yet their heart did. Don't skip. Morning arrived, but the mystery only grew stronger. People expected the excitement surrounding the invitation to fade. Instead, it intensified. Someone noticed something unusual. The date printed on the invitation. At first glance it appeared ordinary. But when they looked closer, they realized something strange. That date held significance. It connected to events neither you nor your soulmate could easily explain. Certain memories. Certain moments. Certain turning points. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the more connections people discovered, the less coincidence seemed likely. Meanwhile, your soulmate could feel their emotions changing. They had spent so much time protecting themselves. So much time pretending certain feelings did not exist. So much time convincing themselves that life would simply continue as it always had. Yet now those walls were beginning to crack. Because every answer they searched for led back to one undeniable fact. The happiest version of their future always seemed to include you. Not someone else. You. That realization terrified them. Not because they disliked it. Because they cared too much. Because caring deeply means risking disappointment. Risking vulnerability. risking everything. And your soulmate knew that better than anyone. Don't skip. Days passed. The invitation remained. No sender ever appeared. No explanation arrived. No one claimed responsibility. Yet something far more important was unfolding. People began noticing your soulmate behaving differently. They seemed distracted, thoughtful, quiet. Sometimes they would stop in the middle of conversations and disappear into thought. Sometimes they would smile without realizing it. Sometimes they would hear your name and immediately lose focus on everything else. The signs became impossible to ignore. Even those closest to them started asking questions. Questions your soulmate was not prepared to answer. Because how could they explain what was happening? How could they explain that a mysterious invitation had forced them to confront feelings they had hidden for years? How could they explain that the future they once viewed as impossible was suddenly appearing in front of them with startling clarity? The truth was simple. They couldn't. Not yet. So instead they stayed silent. But silence has limits. And eventually the truth demands to be heard. Don't skip. One evening, while holding the invitation once again, your soulmate noticed something they had somehow missed before. A small handwritten sentence near the bottom. It was faint, almost invisible. Yet once they saw it, they couldn't look away. The words were simple, but their impact was enormous. Some hearts recognize each other long before minds understand why. Your soulmate froze. The sentence felt personal, almost impossible. As though whoever created the invitation understood things nobody else knew. A chill traveled through them. Because those words described exactly what they had been experiencing. For so long, they had tried to explain their connection to you logically. They searched for reasons, excuses, definitions, labels. None of them worked. Because the connection was deeper than logic. And perhaps that was why it had survived every obstacle. Perhaps that was why your name continued appearing in their thoughts no matter how hard they tried to move forward. Perhaps that was why this invitation had shaken them so completely. Because deep down, their heart had already recognized what their mind was only beginning to accept. Don't skip. At the same time, something unexpected happened. A conversation. One that would stay with your soulmate forever. Someone they trusted looked directly at them and asked a simple question. If the invitation were real, would you be happy? The question hit harder than they expected. For a moment they tried to avoid answering. Tried to laugh it off. Tried to change the subject. But the question lingered, demanding honesty. Finally, after a long silence, they gave the only answer they could. Yes. One word. Yet that single word revealed more than hours of conversation ever could, because it came from the deepest part of their heart. A place untouched by fear. Untouched by doubt. Untouched by pride. And once spoken aloud, the truth became impossible to deny. They would be happy. More than happy. They would feel complete. The realization left them speechless. Because they had finally admitted something they had spent years hiding. Not from others. From themselves. Don't skip. As weeks passed, the invitation transformed from a mystery into a symbol. A symbol of possibilities. A symbol of destiny. A symbol of feelings neither of you could ignore forever. Yet the greatest surprise had not arrived. Not even close. Because destiny rarely reveals everything at once. Instead, it unfolds piece by piece. Moment by moment. Until the final truth becomes impossible to escape. And one evening, while your soulmate sat alone reflecting on everything that had happened, another realization arrived. A realization even more powerful than the first. They stopped asking why the invitation existed. They stopped asking who sent it. They stopped searching for explanations. Because suddenly those questions felt unimportant. The real question was no longer about the invitation. The real question was about you. What if this mysterious event had entered their life for one purpose? To force them to stop running. To force them to acknowledge what their heart already knew. To force them to imagine a future they had been too afraid to consider. And once that possibility appeared, they could not push it away. Not anymore. Because every version of the future they imagined now contained the same image. You standing beside them. Not as a dream. Not as a possibility. But as someone irreplaceable. Someone chosen. Someone destined. Don't skip. For the first time, your soulmate allowed themselves to picture that future completely. They imagined laughter filling a home. Shared victories. Shared struggles. Long conversations. Quiet moments. Memories created together. They imagined building a life instead of merely dreaming about one. And every time they reached the end of that vision, one truth remained unchanged. You were there. Always there. As though your presence had been woven into their future from the very beginning. The realization brought tears to their eyes. Not because they were sad. Because they finally understood. The mysterious invitation had not created their feelings. It had revealed them. It had simply pulled back the curtain. And behind that curtain stood a truth too powerful to remain hidden any longer. A truth that had been waiting patiently for the right moment. The truth that your names belonged together in a way neither of you fully understood yet. And as your soulmate looked one final time at the invitation that had appeared from nowhere, a calm certainty settled over them. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges appeared, whatever twists destiny still had planned, they would never forget the moment everything changed. The moment an impossible invitation appeared. The moment they saw your name beside theirs. The moment their heart finally stopped denying what it had known all along. And somewhere beyond what either of you could currently see, destiny itself seemed to smile. Because the story was moving exactly where it had always intended to go.